Want to check it? Yeah. Hey, thank you.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. Good morning. I thought, we just don't have enough announcements around here. Oh, look. If you wish to order any DVDs or CDs of the convention lectures, please turn in your audiovisual order form by noon today. Orders can be picked up between 1 and 3 tomorrow in the lobby or mailed to your home. Second, Tim Boyd, our international president, some of you may know him, joins us today at 4:15 with news about Adyar in Chennai, India, the international headquarters. And still, Rosie Ulix will lead our fun night at 7 p.m. this evening in the auditorium. You don't want to miss it. So this morning we have the privilege of hearing from Dr. Roger Gottlieb. He is a professor of philosophy at Worcester Polytechnic Institute. He's studied and written extensively on just what our topic is this time, eco-spirituality. He has many books and lectures and too much to list here. His books include A Sacred Earth, A Greener Faith, A Spirituality of Resistance, Finding a Peaceful Heart and Protecting the Earth. And this morning's topic will be on the radical intelligence of nature, finding how nature teaches us both personal tranquility and a profound unease with destructive social structures. And he can tell it much better than I am. Please welcome Dr. Gottlieb.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction. Thank you for inviting me to this lovely place filled with lovely people. We can begin, as I always do, I will ring this bell. And sit up straight in your chair, let your eyes gently close. Focus your attention on your breath, the rise and fall of your chest, or the place at the base of the nose where breath enters the body. With each breath, you're connected to life. No breath, no connection, no life. And let your body and mind settle into this place and this time. Raise your arms over your head, rub your palms together, bring your palms down over your eyes, slowly open your eyes, and take your palms away. Now, in a sense, that's all I have to say. So, if you get tired or bored, just go back to that connection. But I imagine that Nancy Grace, who was kind enough to invite me and did a wonderful job in arranging with all the details, wants a little bit more, so I will give you a little bit more. But that really is the essence, that sense of connection. Eco-spirituality has a long history in human experience, from shamanic traditions to large global religious traditions. The last line of Psalm 150 in the Old Testament says that everything that has breath, praise the Lord. Kol hanashama tehillah Yah. Right? Ask yourself, what does it mean to experience the world in such a way that we see everything breathing as praising? Tao Te Ching in the Chinese tradition talks about water as a spiritual teacher. 18th and 19th century Protestantism often talked about a two-books tradition, the Bible and nature, both revelation of God. Countless other examples could be offered. However, now things have changed. And by now, I mean the last century or so, roughly, because we are in the midst of an environmental crisis, a profound threat which exists in the future and also in the present and also in the past, a profound threat to the living conditions of countless species, including our own. One, of course, thinks of global warming, pollution, species extinction. One perhaps might not know about the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, which is a soup or stew of plastic waste in the Pacific Ocean, some places on the surface, some places going as much as 100 feet down, composed of plastic waste. The Great Pacific Garbage Patch, originally estimated at being the size of Texas, is now estimated by some to be larger than the United States. In 20 or 25 years, it is estimated there will be more plastic by weight in the ocean than fish. Of course, this time may come sooner as we continue to fish out the ocean. 17 of 20 of the largest food fishes have been fished out. Hundreds of coal-fired power plants are being built in China, even as they talk about reducing greenhouse gases. Our current head of the Environmental Protection Agency is bringing in energy lobbyists and chemical lobbyists to change regulations. The crisis is a crisis of our entire civilization. Our politics, our economics, our philosophy, our religion, our sense of identity, personal identity. And nowhere is this more clear than in one of the great words of one of the great founding mothers of modern environmentalism, Rachel Carson, who pointed out that testing the toxicity of a single chemical was a kind of folly, since our bodies do not experience toxic chemicals individually. We experience them in groups through all the ones that exist. And this made sense in the early 1960s when she said it. And it made sense 35 years later when the then head of the EPA said the same thing, and nothing had changed. I'll return a bit to the spiritual meaning of nature and the spiritual meaning of the environmental crisis. But now I want to raise the question that I was supposed to address here, the radical intelligence of nature. To what can we turn for resources to confront the environmental crisis as individuals, as small communities, as global citizens, as part, hopefully, of the global environmental movement? Where can we turn for help, for instruction, for models? As we are part of this civilization, we carry within us the same seeds of environmental destructiveness that have been wreaked upon the earth. The outer becomes inner. Where did the inner come from, if not from the outer? And how can the outer change, if not the inner change as well? So we all need resources. And the resources, paradoxically enough, can be found in the natural world. So let us begin simply by looking at these three concepts: radical, intelligence, and nature. Begin with the last, nature. Nature, of course, on one meaning, includes everything. Every planet, every star, every molecule, every atom, every part of your body, my body, the body of everybody you ever met. It includes my eyeglasses as well as my eyes. And yet, even though my body is subject to the same laws as rocks, throw me off the roof and I'll fall at the same rate of speed as a rock, and the subatomic particles in my body were formed in the great fireball 14 billion years ago, just like everybody else's and everything else's subatomic particles. And yet, even though we are part of nature completely, we also are distinct. Everything in nature, after all, is distinct. A star is very different from a starfish. A beaver is very different from an amoeba. What is different about human beings? Well, we might say that what's different about human beings is that we live by culture as much or more in some ways as we live by nature. What we believe about ourselves helps constitute, helps shape, helps determine who we are, how we behave, what we do in the world. The moon does not circulate around the Earth because of what it believes. It just does it. We move in various currents. We travel. We attract to certain kinds of people and not others. We perform certain actions and not others because of what we believe. Because this is what shapes us, we have a capacity for moral excess, both in terms of good and in terms of evil. We can seek to create empires. Other species do not do that. We can develop irrational global hatreds and act on those hatreds. We have an attraction to unreality, living in terms of symbol systems, religious systems, political systems, systems of popular culture, living in terms of symbol systems that separate us out from the natural conditions of our existence, such as the air that we breathe, or the water that we drink, or the land that grows our food. We create artifacts that can alter the world in a very short time. Now, other species alter the world by their actions, but nothing like the degree, the scope, or the speed with which we do it. We were manufacturing CFCs, which is a kind of gas. We put them in air conditioners, and as they escaped, they were threatening the ozone layer, which is a protective shield at about 80 to 85,000 feet. If we had not stopped, the ozone layer was on the way to being destroyed, or at least partly destroyed, which would have had catastrophic effects in terms of the ocean, in terms of skin cancer, in terms of cataracts, endless kinds of effects. We did that. We managed. We've changed the climate and are continuing to change the climate in a very short time. We also make artifacts. I don't think any other species does this. We make artifacts that weaken us. We drive in cars. Our bodies are weaker. We give our children cell phones, and the children are developing nearsightedness at an alarming rate. We use computer technology, and we can't remember anything anymore. I remember a time when I knew 20 to 25 phone numbers by heart. Anybody still do that? No. I don't even know my children's phone numbers by heart because it's in the phone, right? So the artifacts we create make us weaker. If the computers were to crash, what would we do? How would we function? If the cars stopped running, how would we get anywhere? Why does America have so many back problems besides obesity? We walk hardly at all. We wear shoes. We walk on flat grounds. The muscles of our feet don't develop. The feet don't support the back. And that's why we have a thriving business for chiropractors. In all these ways, human beings are set out from the rest of the natural world. Now, the fact that we are both part and set out from the natural world doesn't mean we can't have moral relations with it. Some people say, well, if we're part of nature, how can you say we're destroying nature? Well, if you're part of a family, how can it be said if you're destroying a family? If you've ever had an addict in the family, you know how they do it. Okay? So we're part of nature, we're distinct, and we're having certain kinds of effects. And therefore, we have to ask, given that we are shaped by a culture, given that we express a civilization in the way we live, we can then ask, how should we act? And what do we have to learn? Remember, the premise I start with is the environmental crisis. The premise, the question then is, what do we have to learn? That was nature. Now let's talk about intelligence, the radical intelligence of nature. In what sense is nature intelligent? Well, let's take the most obvious one first, is that you have an immense collection of living beings on this planet who evolved, adapted, interconnected, interwove with each other, and there was nobody who planned it. There was no intelligence that structured this situation in advance. There was rather a process in which organisms live, connect, and develop. You have a totality of forces, of beings, which historically have made us possible. The naturalist Brenda Peterson grew up in a national forest area in Oregon, and she said, as I grew up, I thought the trees were our ancestors. They were there before us, and they were part of our lives. I thought the trees were our ancestors. And of course, in a sense, that's true. The trees are our ancestors. It depends what you mean by ancestor. It depends how much of a debt you believe we owe to all the beings, through all the processes of evolution, which ended up with us, with every other person that you care about, you love, every other person who makes your life possible, whether it's your mother and your father, or the people who built your home, or grow your food, provide your electricity. All this without a plan, without a planner. A system that is infinitely complex, remarkable, beautiful, and ever-changing. The radical intelligence of nature includes also the things nature can do that perhaps we don't know about. For instance, I bet you don't know that beech trees are communists. What has he been smoking? All right, so remember Marx's definition of communism. My first 3 books were on Marx's theory, so I have a little bit of background here. From each according to his ability, to each according to his needs. From each according to his ability, to each according to his needs. And what's that got to do with beech trees? Well, in a certain beech forest in Germany, it's been shown that of the trees in this forest, some are tall, some aren't tall, some are better situated in terms of water and sunlight, somewhat worse. They all manufacture sugar, which is what photosynthesis does, at the same rate. How is that possible? Well, it turns out that the root systems, sometimes directly and sometimes through underground networks of fungi, communicate. The trees communicate with each other, and the ones that are more powerful and more productive share with the ones that are less productive and less powerful. From each according to his ability to each according to their needs. Why do they do this? Well, I haven't asked the beech trees, nobody else has. But one thing that's known is that forest health depends on the kind of microclimate that forests need. Protection against too much sun, too much wind, and ability to retain water. And because of that, each tree needs all the other trees. Separate them out, make a lot of room around a tree, it'll grow fast and it'll die soon. So the beech trees have this kind of intelligence. The acacia trees in Africa, if a giraffe starts to nibble on the bark, the tree will emit a certain chemical which blows in the wind and alerts the other trees in the neighborhood, and they all put out something that makes the bark taste lousy to zebras. There's other kinds of trees which, if insects come and start eating the leaves, the leaf, quote, tastes the saliva of the insect and puts out another kind of smell that attracts the particular predators of those insects. It calls for help. Higher animals, which I suppose includes us, but baboons and wolves and things like that, are clearly carry what we would call human-like or animal-like or mammal-like emotions. They have love, they have devotion, they grieve when mates are dead. Lower animals have a remarkable amount of coordination. Check out an anthill sometimes, or schools of fish. There's a communicative network among these beings. And so each tree, each ant, each wolf exists both as an individual with its life, its birth, its death, and also in connection. Also in connection. Sound familiar? As a way of living? An acknowledgement of the significance of the collective existence. That's why the beech trees help each other. But also a sense of individual fate. Animals can do amazing things. Anybody here heard of the tardigrades? Tardigrades are microscopic organisms. If you see them under a microscope, they sort of look like bears, big kind of funny bears, with little things sticking out from them. They can endure practically anything. Heat up to 180 degrees. Cold almost down to absolute zero. Blast them out into space in a complete vacuum, and they just go into a kind of suspended animation and come back smiling. That's tardigrade. Micro, you can't see them with the naked eye. Look them up on the internet sometime. Tardigrades. Remarkable. the number of incredible things about nature, its intelligence, its ability to function. Now, of course, flip back to the first thing I said about evolution. Of course they function. If they didn't, they'd be dead, right? Too bad about the dinosaurs. I mean, ask the dinosaurs how they feel about climate change, right? They'll have a different story to tell. You know, well, isn't it great that we got mammals? Not from the standpoint of the dinosaurs, right? So you have this incredible system with no waste, no surplus or useless beings. Each being is part of the system as a whole. If you stand up on the tallest mountain in the world and you look around and you're gifted all of a sudden with miraculous sight and you can see everything in the world, what will you see? Well, two Buddhist monks did this, and one Buddhist monk said, look, and he's crying, tears are rolling down. He says, look, they're eating each other. The guy says, no, you've got it wrong. They're feeding each other. And of course, both are true. They're eating and they're feeding, and that's the system. And all of this is happening without an ego, without selfishness, without arrogance, without a fear of death, which leads, as it does people, to create fantastic realms that are the opposite of nature, realms where nothing ever changes, where people are invulnerable, realms of heaven, kung fu forms called iron hands, so your hands become invulnerable to anything. Plato's forms, ideas which never change and are perfect as they are. Nature doesn't fear death. It avoids it. It resists it. But it doesn't fear it. Nature gives what it gives to all human beings equally. Take the richest person in the world and the poorest person in the world, it's going to rain on them. The birds will sing for a prisoner about to be executed as much as for a saint. There's no preference. There's no status. And therefore, there's no need to defend status. Nature doesn't have to act out of a fear of death or hate people who have a different image of what death means, or have, as a Chinese emperor did, 10,000 servants murdered and buried with him so he'd have servants in the afterlife. These kinds of excesses of culture, of civilizational fear of our natural condition of birth, life, death, birth, life, death. These do not occur with anything but us. Within the realm of nature, the absence of status means that a redwood, if you've ever seen redwoods, they're absolutely magnificent. A redwood is not better than an ant or the fungi under the soil or an amoeba. It's just bigger and longer lived. But without the bacteria on its roots, it wouldn't stay alive. Without the bacteria in our guts, we wouldn't stay alive either. That's why you feel so crummy after you take antibiotics, because it's reduced the bacteria, necessary bacteria that live in your body. Nature is perfect, but that doesn't mean it gives us everything we want. There are viruses, there are parasites, there are hurricanes. Though, of course, now hurricanes bear the stamp of human beings having altered the climate. There is starvation. There are children born with serious physical or intellectual problems. Nature is perfect in that it's a complete system which works and makes possible everything we have and everything we love. That's its intelligence. That's the intelligence, that's nature. What about radical? Radical, to quote Marx again, means to go to the root. Interesting that he used the word root, to go to the basis, to go to the foundation. And any significant relationship with nature, I think, constitutes, shapes, a profound political, social, and cultural critique of current world culture, world civilization, world economics, politics, forms of the family, and individual self-understanding. Nature knows how to give everything it has to give without obsessing about the result. A tree will try to live as long as it can in its relationships with other trees. It will not spare one molecule of energy worrying about the guy with the chainsaw. It will not spare one molecule of energy hating the guy with the chainsaw. It will put everything it has into living, but it will not give up its peace of mind out of fear or hatred or guilt. If we take a close look at the natural world, we see a measure of what we are doing, of what we have done. Here's a quotation from Anne Frank, a very famous quotation. "The best remedy for those who are afraid, lonely, or unhappy is to go outside, somewhere where they can be quite alone with the heavens, nature, and God. Because only then does one feel that all is as it should be and that God wishes to see people happy amidst the simple beauty of nature. As long as this exists, and it certainly always will, I know that there will be comfort for every storm." And this is written by a teenager trapped in an attic, knowing that the Nazis in Holland would be glad to murder her every chance they had. Every storm, says Anne Frank. Nature will always be there, says Anne Frank. But now she goes outside and goes to the nearby pond and sees a dump truck back up to the pond and tip up its load and drop it into the water, and an acrid smoke comes up from the pond, and the plants on the side of the pond wither, and the smoke comes in the air, and she starts to cough. What is nature when we have the Pacific garbage patch? What is nature when we have written ourselves on the outside of the planet, when we've even written ourselves in space around the planet with this 25,000 pieces of football or larger sized junk that our space missions have left there circulating the planet? Where are the comforts of nature when children are born with 100 toxic chemicals in their bloodstream regularly in the United States? Does this mean that we should leave it alone? Or, as the great American naturalist Edward Abbey says, keep it like it was? We can't. We cannot recognize the rights of nature, not unless we're going to never build another house, never walk along the ground, starve ourselves to death like the Janes. But we can ask ourselves, how much sense does the way we are living make? What do we truly need and what don't we need? What are superfluous, crazy, addictive luxuries? Every addict knows that they are destroying themselves. Somewhere we know as a culture, as a global civilization, that we are destroying ourselves, but we can't stop, which leads us to the moral responsibility of undoing our own addiction to modernity. Even the most casual actions reflect a lack of awareness. You go to school or you go to work, you have a hard day, you go home, get a cup of coffee or tea or a beer or smoke a joint, whatever is your thing, and you flip on the TV. Now, don't kid me, right? A lot of people do that, nod, right? Except you don't. You don't. You don't turn on the TV. Anybody know what I'm talking about? The TV is already on. TV is already on. It wouldn't respond to a remote control unless it was on. Television, microwaves, computer chargers, a whole host of appliances and technology within homes are constantly drawing power, even when they're theoretically turned off, just as long as they're plugged in. This is called phantom or standby power. Some people estimate it's 5 to 10% of the domestic energy use in the United States, more than the countries of Guatemala and Greece combined. The whole amount those countries use, we use more just leaving this shit plugged in all the time. Did you know? Probably you didn't. That's a sort of nerdy philosopher like me to ferret out this stuff. Did anybody say, let's have a vote on whether this stuff should be produced like that? No. Is it advertised? No. Why not? Why not? That was radical. That was intelligence. That was nature. Now, bring us back to the concept of eco-spirituality. Spirituality is a widely used term in a million different contexts. My own definition is very simple. Spirituality is a belief, a set of experiences, and a set of actions. It's the belief that the only way to true contentment, to true happiness, is through the development of certain virtues. It's the action of trying to live by that belief, and it's the experience of doing so. Awareness, acceptance, gratitude, compassion, and love. To me, these are the heart of the spiritual quest. They define what both theists and non-theists, both traditional Christians and modern Buddhists, what all of us meant when we said, I want to take a more spiritual approach. I want to derive a spiritual lesson. I'm on a spiritual path. I had a spiritual insight. Although all those things constitute spirituality when they help cultivate awareness, acceptance, gratitude, compassion, and love. How does this relate to nature? Gratitude. Gratitude that it exists, that it ever was, that we got to see it and breathe it and taste it and roll around on it. And if we're so lucky to have orgasms, which, I mean, do we have to have orgasms? I mean, it's like color, right? Color, orgasms, things like that. What a great thing they gave us. A traditional Jew starts every morning before you get out of bed, before you go to the bathroom, with a simple prayer. I am thankful to you, O God, for restoring my soul to my body. Great is your consistency. Great is your fidelity. Now, you can believe in God. You can not believe in God. Not really significant. Certainly take out the metaphysical, unexperienced concept of God and put in nature. I'm grateful to you, nature, for restoring my soul to my body. I could have died in my sleep. I didn't. I'm alive. My lungs work. I have that connection of breath. The founder of Hasidic Judaism, the Baal Shem Tov, said, the world is full of wonders and miracles. We take our little hands and we close our eyes and we see nothing. You know, what is he talking about? Certainly there are miracles in Judaism, but the world isn't filled with them. The plagues that struck Egypt, the parting of the Red Sea, Joshua making the sun stand still. The world wasn't filled with those things. They were very rare. So what did he mean? Well, he could only have meant the miracle that our eyes work, that we can walk, that you heard a cardinal on the way to the bus stop, that the sound of the flute penetrates your mind, that a baby is born. Miracles. And for miracles, gratitude. Awe and appreciation for what it is. Gratitude. Engaging us with love for that which is miraculous, for that which is awesome. We respond in love. If you're a theist, you can see nature as a gift from God, a gift. If you were a violinist and somebody gifted you with one of these old 200-year-old violins, and for some reason, I don't know, they can't make violins that good anymore. So these things cost $250,000 for a single violin. You would not use it as an ashtray. You wouldn't take it to the beach and leave it on the sand because it's precious. It's miraculous, the sound that comes out of it, what you're able to do with it. And the same thing with nature. The virtue of acceptance of our finitude, that it's temporary, that whatever we get here isn't going to last. You're going to be here long? Not very long. No, and that's okay. Whether it's us as individuals, us as a species. There have been frogs on this planet for 70 million years. Do we think even a wonderful thing like the Theosophical Society is going to last 70 million years? Or Judaism, or Catholicism, or the Islamic State, or the American Constitution, or the human species? No. Eventually the sun will explode. The whole planet's going to go out. And that's okay. It's enough that it ever was. We can see the suffering of nature. You can go to Midway Island, which is in nowhere in the middle of the Pacific, and you see the seabirds, after they're dead, cut open, and their guts are filled with plastic refuse. You can see sea turtles choking on plastic bags. You can see one turtle whose shell was an insane figure 8 because a plastic ring had formed, when it was a small turtle, had gone onto the top of its shell. You can hear the screams, whether they make sound or not, of the animals in all the slaughterhouses, in all the labs, the screams of what we've done. And that, understanding their suffering and our suffering, generates compassion, acceptance, awareness, gratitude, compassion, and love. We have a kinship with nature that emerges from relationship, not from some prior ontological decision. Oh, I think I'll sit down in my philosophical study and decide whether or not nature has value. No, we engage with it. The trouble is now we have a culture which makes that kind of engagement much, much harder. 96% of the people who go to national parks never get more than a quarter of a mile from a parking lot. Right? People think nature is a Disney special. They think it's purely aesthetic. Now, it is, nothing's more beautiful than a redwood tree, a sunset, the ocean, a bird in flight. But the spiritual meaning of nature is not how pretty it is. It's how alive it is. The spiritual meaning of nature is the way in which it engages us to develop our acceptance, awareness, gratitude, compassion, and love, which means that our task is to cultivate that relationship both on an immediate level, for instance, by finding one tree that you visit for 10 minutes every day. Same tree every day, same tree every day for years and years, which we may cultivate at knowing a certain landscape, and which we can also cultivate by political engagement. For the collective shift that's needed is one that can only be finally accomplished through the exercise of political power. There are countless political, economic powers working to destroy living species. Since I've been talking, another 4 or 5 species have gone extinct through what we have done to their ecosystems. The powers that be must be answered by collective power of our own. There is, thank God, goddess, or whoever, a global environmental movement. Everything from neighborhood groups trying to clean up the local stream to international groups like Greenpeace. They deserve our support, our money, our time, our phone calls. The future is very much in doubt. There's no question about that. The future is very much in doubt. And one of the nice things about being alive is that you don't know what it's going to hold. Certainly somebody of my age, the idea of gay marriage, when I was 18, I would have scratched my head and said, what the hell are you talking about? I have no idea what it even means. Or as an academic, I can say that certainly when I was in graduate school, the idea that half of the Ivy League would have female president, and that these hot shit Ivy League professors, male professors, would have to kiss the ass of a female president of Harvard, of Yale, of Princeton, whatever. Impossible. Never would have happened. Wouldn't even thought of it. And yet, this has happened. Sadly, we wouldn't have thought about global warming either. We don't know what the future holds. But look at it this way. Look at it this way. God forbid someone you dearly love is in the hospital. They're probably dying, but you don't know. Would you spend all your time thinking, what's going to happen, what's going to happen, what's going to happen? Or would you go and see them every day, hold their hand, sing to them, try to make them feel a little bit better instead of obsessing about what's going to happen in the future? You would show them some love. And this love is both immediate, in terms of whether or not you put pesticides on your lawn, and also much more global in terms of what political organizations you belong to and you support. There is no easy answer to this situation. It is, I believe, the question of our time. Can we find a way to learn the spiritual lessons of nature and translate those lessons into a different mode of being as individuals and as a global civilization? Can we see the connections between the way we treat trees and the fact that racial minorities are disproportionately affected by toxic substances in this country? That the cancer rate on American native reservations is 18 times the normal. That toxic waste after toxic waste facility is put in black neighborhoods. Can we see those kinds of relationships? The tribes destroyed, the areas of Africa ruined by oil development, and when people resist, they're shot down. Can we see all these connections and still take joy in the fact that we're here, that we got to be here? I'll end with a slightly longer quotation from a book I wrote called Spirituality, What It Is and Why It Matters. The great advantage of certain forms of spirituality is often the comfort they bring. A comfort based in the notion of an all-powerful personality, God, to whom we can turn, or a universally valid method of enlightenment, which we can practice. Yet nature, or at least the earth, is in rough shape. There is no guarantee that it will pull through in anything like its present, already severely compromised form. Nature is sacred and awe-inspiring, and simultaneously vulnerable and under attack by us. Oneness with God, complete enlightenment, these are states of the soul that promise an end to suffering. But become one with a clear-cut forest, an ocean choking on plastic waste, or a frog born with organs outside its body because of pollution. This is a kinship with suffering, not an escape from it. In this way, spirituality tied to nature, while often similar to other forms, has its own distinct trials. Yet just because of these, it has its own particular potential strength. Developing spiritual virtues in the face of global environmental insanity and our own moral sloppiness, technological distraction, and attachment to ease is a daunting challenge. It takes us far beyond the dualisms of self and world, spirituality and politics, personal life, and our effects on the entire earth, to the point where all of these are seen as indissolubly fused. In just that way, it can enrich our spiritual life as perhaps nothing else. Close your eyes. Let your eyes gently close. Bring your attention to your breath. And ask yourself, is there anything that you just heard that you particularly want to remember? And ask yourself, is there anything you particularly want to inquire into further? And now just let your mind rest on your breath. Raise your arms over your head, rub your palms together. Bring your palms down over your eyes. Slowly open your eyes and take your palms away. Okay, thank you very much. And if folks have comments, questions, interrogations, disputes, pray. I tell my students, I try to be open to criticism and I love praise. So I'm here. We have a few minutes.
I love the comment that you made, thank you, that nature puts all of itself into the energy of living. But I find it interesting also that sometimes we look at nature, animals, for example, as predatory and cutthroat, and we seem to use them as the example of why this is all about the survival of the fittest, and we've got to take care of ourselves just like they do. And I've always thought that there's probably a misunderstanding by us of what they're really doing. And I'm just wondering if you could comment on what we may not understand is really going on and what seems like the predatory aspect of nature.
Yeah, great. Nature is not Disney, right? I mean, so it's not, oh, isn't that cute? There are these wasps which lay eggs in the body of caterpillars. When the eggs hatch, they eat their way out of the caterpillar. Yes, it's eat and be eaten. It's red in tooth and claw, like Hobbes said. But like the story about the Buddhists, it's also about everything feeding each other. There's only something wrong with that if you have this very human rejection, fear, or as Ernest Becker said, denial of death, right? The opposite is not life and death, it's birth and death, and they go together. To be born is to die. So if we don't accept that, then, oh my God, Fluffy is being attacked by that mean wolf, or the mean wolf is being attacked by, the lovely wolf is being attacked by the mean bear, or, you know, you can go up that, or those terrible sharks, which kill about 25 people a year, and what do we kill, 15 million or something? But they're terrible, those sharks. The difference is that we have a cultural form which, on the one hand, can make us crazy, on the other hand, can make us extremely ethical. It can give us a Saddam Hussein, and it can also give us a Gandhi. So the models, the lessons we take from nature have to be very intelligently acquired. But that a bear will, I mean, you see those bears just scooping up the salmon in the spring, right? Or whenever it is that the salmon go upstream. Not so great for the salmon, but it's great for the bear. Now, in most ecosystems over a fairly long time, there's a kind of balance there. There's also an evolutionary pattern where whole species will be replaced. I mean, they used to think that forests reached what they call the climax stage, and the forest would, uninterfered with, would just stay like that forever. And they realized that, no, that's wrong. Even what looks like a mature forest will change over time. So either we accept that fundamental rule, change, temporariness, the reality of death, the reality of mutual consumption, or we don't. I think if we accepted it, we'd be a lot less likely to be mean and selfish and build empires and try to escape into our phones, our televisions, our fantasies about heaven, all that kind of stuff. This is what we have. Run away from it at your peril, and you just make it worse. I don't know, did that answer your question? Oh, great. Okay. Yes, sir.
I deeply appreciate your speaking, thinking, and musings. I appreciate your comment about how humans are cultural based, and we live by our beliefs, which sets us apart from other parts of nature. So I'm curious, from your point of view, philosophy, if you could shift something, what kind of things would you think are the most important ways to shift human culture to restore us to a healthier place?
Well, I don't know if, the last 10,000 years we've ever been there. So I don't know about the restore. I would say, and there may be sort of real fundamental differences between what people in the United States need to do and what people in Guatemala or, somewhere have to do. Slow down. Slow down and think. People have lost, or certainly not acquired, the ability to think. People, and I'm so far to the left I fall off the planet occasionally, but on the left as well as on the right, in the secular world as well as in the religious world, there is an inability to think, to really examine a statement, a person, a movement, a claim. We just respond. We just blah, 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 blah. So slow down. Find out what's going on, which is hard because our capacity for information is so much of an overload over our emotional capacity. I get 10 emails a day at least from different organizations about how horrible everything is. If I didn't do anything but read those emails, I'd be even more depressed. If you're not depressed, you're not paying attention. That was a joke, Francis. Slow down, find out what's going on, and take some responsibility. Right? I think we are not, I'm a socialist, which means, rule in the interests of and by the broad mass of the population. But the broad masses of the United States are not capable. They don't even vote, half of them. So how are we going to run things? But if we don't run things, who will? The experts? Well, we've seen how well that works. The corporate elites, not very good. The bureaucrats. So take responsibility. slow down, find out what's going on, take responsibility.
You were talking about, and I found interest, I really appreciate your point of view.
Thank you.
Tom, put it to your mouth.
Okay. Can you hear me now? Anyway, you talked about nature being unplanned, and I'm wondering if you've considered or could comment on the idea that this is all actually planned as design fail or a process of entropy.
By what? Planned by?
Planned by
Put your-
Gianni Kohans, planned by beings beyond us.
Oh, I see. Yeah. You know, I have never, and this is, you know, me personally speaking, I have never had any interest in metaphysics, whether of a sort of secular philosophy kind of metaphysics or religious metaphysics. I remember being 9 years old thinking, I don't believe in God. I'm supposed to feel guilty about that, but I don't. It was a very clear thought for such, I mean, it's not surprising I became a philosopher. You know, when I meet people I knew in high school, I say I'm a professional philosopher, they say, oh yeah, that's no surprise. So none of that makes sense to me on a gut level. William James, great American philosopher, said that there are living options and dead options. So a living option is like, you know, steak or chicken, or, you know, eggplant or butternut squash. A dead option is something that the possibility of choosing it doesn't appear to you. So personally, the possibility of other beings or God or gods or that kind of thing, I just don't connect with it. You know, that may be like a tone deafness on my part, or I may be in touch with reality and other people living in fantasy, or somewhere, or both may be true. But that's just me personally.
Thank you. Hi, thank you so much for your talk. It's been really encouraging and interesting. One question I have is when you were talking about maintaining the balance between being a witness of everything that's going on and not sort of shrouding our eyes to the horrible things that some of our influence is causing on the planet, but also not losing hope and not losing the joy of being. And a question I've been working with lately in terms of relating to nature and relating to people is, how do you sit with suffering without letting it destroy you? So I'm wondering what your personal, like in your life, how you've negotiated that in your mind.
All right, well, that was one of my earlier books called The Spirituality of Resistance, raised that question. How do you be happy? And I used analogies with the Holocaust, because if you read material about the Holocaust, and I've done a lot of research and written about that, you find that people, as awful as it was, as destructive as it was, they reached a point where they really felt a certain kind of joy in being alive, in resisting, in fighting back, knowing that, yes, my moral identity at the present time requires resistance, and in giving myself to a certain kind of resistance, I can move past the depression and sense of powerlessness. So resistance, I would say, is number one. Number two, a lot of platitudes about self-nourishing. Number three, an acceptance that, you know, if something you love dies, you're going to grieve. And that's a sign not of anything wrong with you, that's a sign that you love. So, you know, a lot of the problems with emotions is not the emotions themselves, but the sort of the meta-commentary on emotions. I shouldn't be so sad. Well, maybe you should be so sad. Maybe it's okay to be sad. And if you felt okay about it, you would work through the grief to something else. But the grief repressed, the grief ignored, just becomes physical symptoms, addiction, violence, and things like that. We all have to make our peace with reality. And making peace sometimes requires a certain kind of war. I mean, when I first became an environmentalist and took it seriously, and for many years I couldn't. It was too much. I didn't have the courage, the moral courage and the emotional courage. But when I did, I was obsessed. I mean, I was crazy, you know, and people would see me coming and walk the other direction, you know. My wife would say, enough, I don't want to hear about the dying coral reefs anymore. You know? And I had to go through that and come out the other side. You know, and to believe that it's enough that it ever was, that this miracle exists. And even if it God forbid, ended tomorrow. We've had it. What a miracle that we can be alive, that there's chocolate cake and Bach and orgasms and the night sky and all those kinds of things. What a miracle. And to allow myself to feel that as deeply as I feel for the rainforest being cut down and the dying whales. Yes, sir.
Well, if you'd been my rabbi, I would have stayed closer to the tradition. Comment one. Number two is I'm glad you mentioned the trees. My grandmother tree, I'm with her about 4 times a week, 5 times a week. Great wisdom in the trees. If you were to put your finger on one thing that might motivate our addicted world to change in a practical way, what might that be?
You know, I really do believe in spirituality, and I really do believe in those 5 virtues. I think awareness. I mean, it has to start with an awareness that these cell phones don't make us feel better. I mean, I once wrote a little online, a blog thing about the internet, and I asked people, have you ever made love to a vampire? They're charismatic. They're sexy. You start to make love to them. Then you realize they're sucking your blood. And that's what these things are. But if you're not aware that consumerism, that cell phones, that the internet, as useful it is, I'm not putting it down, that these things need to be extremely limited, and they're not making us happy. Every psychological study of American population over the last 40 years saw people getting more lonely, more depressed, more isolated. It's not making us happy. I don't care who wins American Idol or the Super Bowl. It's not making us happy. The antidepressants are making us sicker. There's no question about it. And the drug companies totally lied about their effects in any case. So I don't think anything can happen without awareness. And I don't think anything good can happen without it either, right? I think political movements, I've written a great deal about this. I did one book on what religion and politics, left politics, have to learn from each other. A lot of left politics is done without awareness, and that always ends up in a place of fanaticism, repression, inability to tolerate dissent. You know, we've seen where that goes, and it's no place good. Awareness. We must be aware of how we feel and the effects of what we're doing in the world. Okay. Well, there might be time for one more, but yes, sir.
I'm just curious if you've any comments about the possibility for, I'm sure it would be fear, motivating us to develop a greater literacy in terms of complexity science. It's a very new science, of course, and not widely known, but I suspect that we need to learn how to think about complicated things. When I see something complicated, I just want to turn away. I say, it's complicated. But the complexity science has only been around for 30 years, but there are tools coming out of that field. And I think that as, well, I'm a dreamer in some ways, but as our public could learn to change its expectations of what we expect out of our political system, for instance. I don't know if you have any comments.
You know, Marx said, somebody said to Marx, we have to change the way we educate people. And he said, okay, but who's going to educate the educators? To me, the great tragedy is that we educate people to do what? What did you learn in every single class you ever took? Same thing in every class. You learn to take orders from some schmuck like me in the head of the classroom. You learn to obey. Right? That's what we trained you to, whether it was math or science or geography or phys ed. We taught you to obey. Imagine if we flipped that over and starting in kindergarten gave children limited and gradually expanding power to control things in the classroom. And then they could have representatives and see the difference between somebody who really cared about them and somebody who was just mouthing off and was after their own power. Give them constantly expanding experience in political life leading up to high school and college. What a different society would be. But of course, that's not what education is for. Education is to train people to be part of neoliberal capitalist order. But it's not impossible. And who knows, right? There are now 200 international environmental treaties that didn't exist 30 years ago. There's an environmental movement in every country, on every continent. There are people struggling to make it real and to recognize the reality for what it is. And let's all be part of it. Thank you very much.